Hello, I'm Tomas Gabor, Managing Director of Sysco. For almost 20 years, I've been investigating mold, damp, indoor air quality problems in homes, workplaces across the UK. In the last episode, we talked about what mold is and why it grows. Today, we are going to answer one of the questions we are asked more than any other. Is black mold actually dangerous to your health? The short answer is yes, mold can affect your health, but it's not quite as simple as many people think. Let's start by clearing up some of the biggest misconceptions. There isn't one mold called. In fact, many different mold species can appear black, or dark green, or dark brown. Simply looking at the color tells us very little about what species we are dealing with. People often assume that if it's black, it must be highly toxic. That's simply not true. Color is a very poor way of identifying mold. From an industrial hygiene perspective, we never identify mold by color alone. We identify it by laboratory analysis, microscopy, and understanding the environment in which it grows. So why can mold make people feel unwell? The answer isn't usually because the mold itself is poison. It's because mold continuously releases microscopic spores. Those spores become airborne and we breathe them in every single day. Most healthy people inhale thousands of fungal spores every day without even noticing. Our immune system deals with them perfectly well. The problem starts when indoor mold begins producing much higher concentration than we would normally expect. That's when exposure increases and symptoms can begin to develop. Now, this is an important point. Mold doesn't affect everyone in the same way. Some people may live in a moldy property for years and experience very few symptoms. Others can react very quickly. The groups we pay particular attention to may be young children, older adults, pregnant women, people with asthma, people who suffer from allergies, and anyone with weakened immune system. For these individuals, prolonged exposure can be much more significant. The most common health effects are actually irritation and allergic reactions. People may experience a blocked or runny nose, itchy or watery eyes, persistent coughing, wheezing, throat irritation, or worsening of asthma symptoms. Some people also describe headaches, poor sleep, or feeling generally unwell. One thing we see quite often during investigation is that people notice they feel better after leaving the property for a few days, but their symptoms return shortly after coming home. While that doesn't automatically prove mold is responsible, certainly something worth investigating. Now, let's address another subject that's often discussed online. Mycotoxins. You've probably seen headlines claiming black mold produces dangerous toxins that poison people. The reality is more nuanced. Some mold species, under certain environmental conditions, can produce compounds known as mycotoxins. But producing a mycotoxin doesn't automatically mean occupants are being exposed to harmful levels. The scientific evidence surrounding inhalation exposure in domestic building is still developing. From an industrial hygiene perspective, our primary concern remains prolonged exposure to elevated airborne spores and fungal fragments, particularly in damp environments. That's where the strongest scientific evidence is. I'll give you an example. We have recently asked to investigate a family home where the occupants were convinced they had a toxic black mold. Naturally, they were worried. When we carried out the investigation, the mold itself turned out to be relatively limited. The big issue was extremely high humidity throughout the property. Windows were running with condensation every morning. Ventilation was poor. Moisture levels were elevated throughout the building. The mold wasn't really the root cause, simply the visible sign that the indoor environment had become far too damp. Once ventilation was improved and the moisture source addressed, the affected materials professionally cleaned, both building and the occupants improved significantly. So this is where industrial hygiene differs from simply cleaning mold. When we investigate a property, we are asking several questions. How much mold is present? What species are present? Where is the moisture coming from? How long has the problem existed? Are spores becoming airborne? Who is being exposed? Perhaps more importantly, what practical steps will stop this happening again? Because simply wiping mold off a wall rarely resolves the underlying problem. One of the biggest myths we hear in this is, if it's black, it's a dangerous mold. In reality, some black molds present relatively low health concern, while some pale green and white molds can be equally important. The color tells us almost nothing. The environment, the species, the amount of mold, and the level of exposure are what really matters. So if there is one thing I'd like you to remember from today's episode, it's this. Don't judge mold by its color. Judge it by why it's growing, how much is, and whether people are being exposed over time. That's how industrial hygiene is. In our next episode, we are going to look at something that surprises many homeowners. Why does mold keep coming back, even after I cleaned it? Sometimes again and again. We'll explain why cleaning is often a temporary fix and how identifying the moisture source is the key to solving the problem. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in our next episode.